In the book called Basic Bakunin, the author talks about the classic Russian anarchist Bakunin. And he is one of those classic Russian anarchists who I've mentioned before, who, unlike these stupid anarcho capitalists today, who are just the exact opposite of communists and think that capitalism is all good and government is all bad, these classic anarchists were at least more consistent than either these anarcho capitalists or the communists. They were more consistent because they pointed out what to them were fundamental flaws, not only in capitalism or not only in government, but in capitalism as well. So they saw fundamental flaws in both government and capitalism. Now, I personally am not an anarchist, but I just appreciate that they're more intellectually and politically, philosophically consistent because anarcho capitalists and communists are stupid. But classic Russian anarchists like Bakunin and Kropotkin and Emma Goldman, they were uh, like, I don't agree with their opinions, but they're more interesting and different from what you would have expected with these, because especially because I think Kropotkin in particular was, and a lot of other classic Russian anarchists were disillusioned socialists or communists even, who moved to anarchism in order to basically essentially accomplish like socialistic or communistic goals, which I think is interesting. And there are differences between different anarchists. Like Emma Goldman, for example, was a violent anarchist, and I believe, if I remember correctly, Bakunin was not, and I don't think Kropotkin was either. But anyway, the essential disagreement that Bakunin has with Marx is, and this is an oversimplification, this is just other people talking about this. The probably Bakunin himself didn't put it this way, and what I'm about to describe about Marx's ideas is probably an oversimplification, and I bet my socialist slash Marxist friends like Ben Burgess would probably have some objections. But anyway, Bakunin's problem with Marxism is I'm sure this is an oversimplified term, but it's called the dictatorship of the proletariat, which is essentially the idea that basically this new government that the communists have taken over, it will be the new unquestionable authority, and it'll lead to a utopia, and everyone will just do what it says, and this will end up in good results. So obviously this is a fundamentally stupid idea because, as everyone knows, like taking over a dictatorship and replacing it another dictatorship just leads to a different type of government oppression. So obviously, as Bakunin predicted himself before, like uh, genocidal communism like Stalinism and Mao and people like that, he was one of the anarchists who predicted these massive genocidal communist revolutions, and he pointed out exactly what all people kind of with common sense know now, that if you take anything to an extreme, it is too far. Although obviously, ironically, Bakunin takes things too far by saying that both capitalism and government are fundamentally flawed, and that most people probably agree that there are some pros and cons to both. I certainly do. People are certainly welcome to disagree as well, of course. Anyway, um, so as Bakunin basically essentially pointed out the most obvious flaw with the so-called dictatorship of the proletariat, right? Which is that, like I said, if you replace dictatorship with another type of dictatorship, then it's not going to be any different from the previous dictatorship, because human beings are inherently flawed. And that's why, in my opinion, literally any government system or lack thereof, including anarchism, it's not going to be perfect, and there are going to be pros and cons to each. And I have no idea what is the best government system. It's probably a different system for different situations in different places at different times, I bet. But anyway, so if you overthrow the what is it, the Bolsheviks, if the proletariat over wait, no. Oh yeah, if the proletariat overthrow the bourgeoisie, then the the proletariat end up becoming the new bourgeoisie, and they become like genocidal, selfish dictators only out for themselves. It's not inevitable, but that's what happened. And George Orwell's famous book Animal Farm, which I like almost as much as 1984, but not quite as much, it describes this perfectly. And it's a dramatization, but it's a fairly like a visceral explanation of the horrors of communism throughout human history, or throughout the 20th century anyway. And it's just like that. The animals overthrow the humans, and they're going to have this utopia, but then the people who are at the top of the proletariat become the new bourgeoisie and become dictators, and like assassinate their opponents and kill people who disagree with them and conceal it and lie about it and get people to report on each other exactly what happened in communism and in Nazi Germany and any like genocidal cult or genocidal political cult that we're talking about, right? So yeah, Bakunin pointed out the obvious flaw with the dictatorship, so-called dictatorship of the proletariat, in that it will just lead to just as many bad outcomes as like rulership by, I don't know, rulership by the capitalist bourgeoisie, which is why I think that Marx had a point in that you know rich people rich people controlling society is not right. That shouldn't happen. But it also shouldn't be the case that government controls everything that everyone do everywhere. Most people agree that it should be somewhere in between, and it's really fucking difficult to figure out, even though a lot of people think that the answer is simple, but that's because they think that their ideology is the solution to all their problems and everyone else's problems too. So, yeah, the point is that Bakunin really points out the essential flaws with specifically the dictatorship of the proletariat in Marxism. And yes, I'm sure some of these terms are oversimplifications, but I think the point remains that any type of authoritarianism is bad. And to me, anarchism is like ironically actually not enough authoritarianism, because there should be some government which to me dictates some authoritarianism, but it's complicated because we can never figure out the right amount. And anarcho-capitalists say any amount is too much. Communists say, well, depending on the type of communists we're talking about, of course, they'll either say that like all government is good, or the if we're talking about anarcho-syndicalists, which are more kind of like some of the classic anarchists, it's more the idea that there should be public ownership of the means of production rather than government ownership of the means of production. I think Noam Chomsky has called himself an anarcho-syndicalist before. So instead of like owners of companies and corporations voting on the decisions that the employees who work there do, and then they invest stock in the company and have a say on the board of investors and all that shit. That sounds good in theory, and there are worker co-ops too. I've only heard of a few. I don't know how well they work, but yeah, all of this shit is complicated. The point is that any political extreme is dumb, in my opinion. Anarchism, communism, anarcho-capitalism, uh, like anything like that. Anyway, yeah, let me know your thoughts about this in the comments. These classic anarchists are very interesting. Thanks, everyone. You all know all the spiel, like and subscribe and shit. All right. Thanks, everyone. Till next time, philosophy is awesome.